Hey guys, welcome back. It's Meg. Today we're going to be running a 20 Plaguefall. You can find my stat weights in the top left corner, my legendary in the top right, and my talent choices and trinkets in the bottom right hand corner. Our affixes for this instance are Fortified, Storming, Inspiring, with a seasonal affix of Prideful. We're going to start off by shrouding to the first set of ads that we're going to pull. We are going to be pulling all of the slimes in this first boss room. Go ahead and throw your Renewing Mist out. We're also going to want to make sure that we're using Crane here. By the time that you're going to need it on the boss, it will be up, especially with the route that we're doing. We're going to go pull some trash after this before going into the first boss. Something to be mindful of that you aren't really going to have to deal with most weeks is storming. Because there is so many frontals and ground effects in this dungeon, you do really want to make sure that you're trying to avoid getting hit by those storming tornadoes. And then if you really want to make sure that you're safe, you can go ahead and drop your Transcendence out in range so you don't have to worry about getting knocked up in the air and then landing in a frontal or in a swirly. In our run, we are also going to be utilizing the Plague Borers. I highly recommend doing this. It makes cooldown management much easier. It also makes everything go so much faster, and that really gives you the leniency on the timer that you're looking for. At this point, our Boomkin realized that he was wearing the wrong set of gear, so he went ahead and slid in the bomb to get back to the beginning of the instance as quickly as possible, which is why I did not dispel, but he will be meeting us in the first boss room before we pull. In this case, it's not that big of a deal because we are using the Plague Borers anyway, so there isn't really much to be done in terms of DPS, and he is a druid, so he can get back by himself without using Shroud or Invis Pot. On a week like this, just make sure that you are aware that none of the kicks are going to be happening, with the exception of the Plague Binder, just because it is an inspiring week, so there's going to be a little bit more damage here than there typically would be. I would recommend running Tiger's Lust in here because there is a lot of dispels, and you can also Tiger's Lust yourself out of this route. I forgot, but normally I think that that would be the way to go in this place. Okay, and our Boomkin has rejoined us with the correct gear on. We're going to go ahead and pull this solo Plague Belcher into the Pride and then head into the first boss. I ended up using Crane on this Pride because I didn't feel like I would need it for this first boss. It is only a 20 and we are not on Tyrannical, so I felt safe using it on the Pride so we could go into the first boss a little bit more stable than we normally would. We are also going to have lots of DPS cooldowns, so this boss shouldn't last horribly long. When the tank pulls the boss and gets him in the position that we're going to be tanking it, make sure you're dropping your Transcendence in melee, so after that Plague Stomp you can get right back in and keep working on extending your HOTS. With our comp we have lots of CC, so we're going to go ahead and use 1 paralysis on the first large ad. We also have Root and Blind and My Paralysis at our disposal, so we have all of the things to stop the oozes and we can just continue to tunnel the boss. On this Plague Stomp I go ahead and I use my Revival to do the Mass Dispel so we can get back in and start DPSing again. Normally I use it in the later half of the fight because we don't have the full duration of the Prideful for mana's sake. He has 8% health and I have 90% mana, so it's not that big of an issue, but on a tyrannical boss, I typically use it towards the end. Something else of note is that you don't get the debuff right away, you do get it a couple seconds after you're knocked back, so don't pop Revival as soon as you get the knockback because you will miss the Dispel. Keep in mind that that Pestilent Slime is partnered with a Inspiring ad, so we want to make sure that we're getting our Plague Borer down to the point where the bomb starts before pulling that in, or at least close, because the Viral Globs not being kicked is quite a bit of damage and we want to be taking that damage for as little time as possible. Again, because of the amount of dispels that are in this portion, I would recommend running Tiger's Lust. I ended up using Diffuse here to dispel myself, but I wanted my dispel for my tank for the poisons, so again, I think that running Tiger's Lust here would be the better option. Once again, we're going to be using the barrels and the plague borers to be taking care of this portion of the instance. There's not really a whole lot of healing to be done outside of the kicks going off and making sure we're getting those diseases dispelled as much as we can. Right here we're going to be starting our gauntlet portion. This is referring to the continuous pulling of the plague borers from the spawn point to use those to kill the adds instead of using cooldowns and killing these organically. What we're going to be doing here is dropping a flame strike or tagging the plague borers to drag them back up this way. We're also going to go ahead and get an end cap on that tentacle as we pulled that accidentally, and we're just going to be dispelling our tank here and making sure that everyone is topped and keeping those adds in the swirlies for the bombs as much as we can. This portion is not very healer intensive, and I'm also not going to be in melee so much because there's not really much to do in terms of refreshing HOTS. It is mostly single target healing and dispels, so you don't want to risk getting hit by a frontal or getting stuck in those swirlies if you don't have to. The plague borers also work on the pride, so if you want you can go ahead and use crane here. You don't have to, but you are going to be sitting on it if you don't use it at this point, so that is up to personal decision. In this run I did not, but typically I would, just to get it on cooldown and get some value out of it. We're not quite done with our Plague Borer use yet, so we're going to go ahead and run back a little bit and pull some of these Slime Claws, and we're also going to be pulling the Patrolling Abomination in the slime area. Right here we tried shouting through Virilax, but we were broken out by the poison, and he got pulled down the ramp a little bit, so I ended up triggering combat as well. We want to make sure that he stays alive so the Plague Borers continue to spawn for the remainder of this room. So I go ahead and die, and we just throw a quick res, and we move on with the rest of this portion of the dungeon. One thing of note is you want to make sure that you are babysitting the health bar of whoever is pulling your Plague Borers. For us it's Fu, so I want to make sure that I am focus healing on him. Unfortunately he does get 2 of the poison casts, and then he does get a Pestilent Bolt that finishes him off here. So it's a little bit unfortunate on the casting, but just for future reference we want to make sure that we are watching our Plague Borer puller. The pull got a little bit messy here with diseases going off. I didn't have revival. There's a couple of kicks and stops that didn't get taken care of, but we end up recovering the pull. We get people healed up and rezzed, and we continue on. Now, I decided to use Crane here instead of holding it for the Pride because there is an Inspiring ad, and there is also a couple of slimes in here that we are not able to kick, so I did unfortunately get killed there as well, but we are going to B-res me and go into the Pride after we kill Virilax. This is probably the worst portion of the dungeon, personally, because we have melee and because it's storming and inspiring. There's a lot of things here that are super deadly if you can't kick, and when one of the affixes revolves around the idea that you cannot kick, it just becomes straight up painful. Going into our second boss, you can go ahead and drop your Transcendence on your starting platform. You don't really need it here for any mechanics. I like to use it just in case we do end up revisiting the original platform. You can run through and you can get out of the pool in the middle quicker, but there's not really anything else you would use it for here other than just getting back to your original positioning. For this, with our comp similar to the first boss, we have lots of CC, we have lots of options for keeping those slimes controlled so we don't have to end up killing them. So what we go ahead and do is root the first one, and then we will go ahead and kill the boss the rest of the way. We're going to go ahead and use Crane on this pull because it is a very tiny platform and there's lots of things happening. You want to make sure that you are not having to stand and cast and then have to interrupt that cast by moving. So we're going to use it here just for ease of access and make sure that we don't lose anyone. We want to make sure here that we are drinking before we go into this. I don't need to because I'm almost full, but typically I end that pull with a little bit less mana than I normally do. But going into this, especially with Inspiring, and then the next pull is not too friendly either, straight into a Prideful, you really want to make sure that you have as much mana as you can possibly have. I'm sitting at a little less than half mana. That's a little bit less than I would have liked to have had, especially because we will be going into a Prideful with this, and then we also are definitely going to get a Venom Fang because of the Inspiring ad. So I would have liked to have drank here, but I did not get the opportunity. I do manage to sit for a couple of seconds before, and then I also have my quantum device available, but I am going to go ahead and pop Crane right off of cooldown. I wish that I would have spread my hots prior and used Essence Font before popping Crane, so I could get a little bit more efficiency on that, but it does end up working out. We're going to go ahead and do our normal Crane rotation and try and keep people topped going into this next boss. On this boss here, I like to drop my Transcendence in melee, and then normally I will roll or to a Rapido out and go and Spinning Crane Kick on an ad to break it out and just transcend back so I don't get smacked too hard. Normally, if the tank is also breaking things out, you're not going to transcend back onto your group immediately, and this is good because you don't want to be hitting anyone in case you get targeted with the Shadow Ambush, and you also want to make sure that you are not getting meleeed by any of the other things. Just make sure that you are not getting enveloped by the webs, and then you should be just fine using your Transcendence to break those ads out. And I am a Necrolord, so we're going to go ahead and save those oozes to our right for the last boss, and we're going to take those into her for the first phase with our Prideful buff. Those oozes are going to be spawning our Prideful as well. In this next room, you can take it fairly easy. It's kind of a lot of tank healing, but most likely they're going to be kiting most of the time as well, so it's kind of just making sure you're getting your Mystic Touch up on everything. In this case, I don't have to because we do have another monk. Dabnel will be applying that dot for us, but we are just going to go ahead and start working through this room. We're going to finish off Bileflesh here. We have 6.17% left, and he's not going to give that to us. We're going to have a little bit of percent left, and these final oozes will be our last percent before our final pride. This is going to be our last pack before our final Prideful. You do want to make sure that you are saving as many cooldowns as you possibly can, because you will be going into Pride straight into the last boss, and you do want to make sure that you have cooldowns for that. I do use Crane here. I use it because we still have one slime alive, and I wanted to make sure that we could stabilize and not die to any cast going off. So I do use it a little bit earlier than I normally would, and honestly I wouldn't even use it here. I would go ahead and save it for the last boss if you can. Make sure you get your Fleshcraft off so you get those slime buffs, and we're going to head to the last boss and start pulling. For this first Infectus Reign, that is our main concern on this boss, is just to make sure that we are not dying to that disease. So because we have our slime buffs and our Prideful buff, we shouldn't have too many issues with this, so we are just going to go ahead and heal through this one normally. We're not going to use Revival, and we don't have Crane available, so we're just going to make sure that we are getting those single dispels and that we are spreading our renewing so that we can Vivify Cleave the entire party through those 4 stacks. I don't think that I do it in this run, but during the intermission you can keep your hots extended by using Rising Sun Kick on those ads that are spawning. Just make sure that you don't have threat, because it's very likely that it could one-shot you. This is our second intermission, so we're going to go ahead and use Lust. Ordinarily, this is where I would end up using Revival to clear our stacks because it is a short phase. We want to make sure that we are extending our hots again, but we don't end up actually getting an Infectious during this portion because of spell queuing and because we had a lot of damage. And during our final Infectious Reign, this is what you would use Crane on if you needed it. Again, in this run, I didn't end up needing it. Our damage was pretty nuts, and Crane was about 5 seconds off of cooldown, so it wasn't worth using. But thankfully, I was renewing my hots, so I did have full use of those, and I just went ahead and used Revival. But again, normally that would be done in the second phase, and Crane would be done in the final phase. And that brings us to the end of our 20 Plaguefall. We actually did end up 2-chesting this one, so that was a very clean run. Very happy with how that went. If you guys have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out on Discord, Twitch, or in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching!